Father, we do just we lift up Maui, I lift up Steve. Thank you so much for that man's heart and just staying in the midst of that. His house is right in the midst of that. And just bless him. Use that fellowship. Lord, I know we keep saying we want to see you bring beauty for ashes. And we know you're the only one who can. So, Lord, just do the work that only you can do and just move mightily. I pray that your name would be exalted in the midst of that. And tonight, as we get into your word and we look at situations that the Apostle Paul's going through, I pray that, Lord, we would know and understand that, God, we're not isolated from bad things happening. And God, that we would know that you desire to work in our lives. And I know that your heart is in such a way you're going to do whatever it takes. And so I just pray that we would have an understanding, God, of this walk that we have with you. And Lord, that we would be careful as we walk with you. And that we would receive the things that you bring in our lives as a gift from you. So give us ears to hear. Bless this time. And Lord, again, thank you for this personal report from Paul and what he's going through. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Hey, we started last week at this section in 2 Corinthians. And as we started it, we're looking at, well, why do bad things happen to good people? And anytime anybody asks me that, I always think it's strange because if my Bible's correct, Jesus said there's no one good but God. So bad things don't happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people because we're all bad people, right? But, there is that question, why does this happen to me? Why me? And so we talked about some of it last week, and part of it is so that we can minister to others and we can relate to them. Now this week we're going to find out sometimes it happens for this reason, because we need to be broken. Because God needs to break us, and being broken isn't always bad. So we're going to look at that. I think I mentioned last week, 2 Corinthians especially is one of the most autobiographical writings of Paul. You want to get to know Paul? As you're reading 2 Corinthians, as you read through it, just jot on a notepad all of the autobiographical remarks he makes about himself, and you'll kind of get to know him. When I was in Bible college, I remember we were challenged to do that with 1 and 2 Corinthians, and then I did it through all of Paul's letters because I wanted to get to know the guy. So anything he said about himself, I just jotted down so I could kind of get to know him, and that's a good exercise to do. But especially here in this book, and especially in this section tonight. And tonight, what we're going to mainly deal with is this thing called depression. I know, in some churches, that's a bad word. And we think we shouldn't, we don't talk about that. That doesn't happen because we're Christians and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we do certain things, which I don't agree with. I think that's really hurting some people. And we need to be careful, Hey, mental illness is real. And people struggle with it. And, I know for a long time, just a little bit of transparency, for a long time, and I'll confess, I don't get depressed. If I'm bummed for 5 minutes, that is a deep, dark depression for me. Like I have fallen in the pit and I can't get out. So that's me. And so I had a hard time relating to people. People would say they're depressed, and I think, well, just get undepressed. What's the matter with you? It should be that easy. And I have to be honest. And then I even got a little bit judgmental. Like, that shouldn't happen to you. And then maybe even the idea, why don't you just fix yourself? Well, here's what I found out. People who are depressed, if they could fix themselves, they would. Right? They would take care of that. And so I think it's a dangerous thing to be that way. And here's the thing. Paul is going to teach us tonight, this whole idea of I can do it is the wrong attitude. We need to rely on him and what God can do. And sometimes God works through medical doctors, right? I mean, hey, we believe he works through us or through them in other ways. I've had procedures done. I've had things done. I've been diagnosed with cancer. I've had all of that going on. So I believe in medicine, and I go, well, then why wouldn't I believe medicine's okay for people with mental things? And over the years, I've been in ministry now 30 years, and I've seen so much destruction from people who, it's interesting, they're not word of faith physically, as far as physical things, but they get word of faith as far as mental things. And they go, you should just fix yourself. Well, again, if people could, they would. And so there are times where that's important, and Paul's not necessarily going to rely on that, but I want us to understand that there are times where God will take us through something and break us so that we can understand. That's what happened to me. He had to break me really hard so I could understand the pain and the hurt that other people are going through. And I thank him for that. I didn't thank him at the time. I was freaking out at the time because I'm like you guys. I don't like to get broken any more than anybody else. But he did that. So the Apostle Paul, listen, the Apostle Paul was not immune to, quote, bad things happening to him, nor was he immune, I believe, in this section, and we're going to look at it later on in 2 Corinthians. I don't think he was immune to depression. And so we need to be careful when we kind of get on people and like put them down for being depressed. And especially, listen, especially when there's someone close to us, we need to love them through it. And we need to come alongside them, and we need to understand again, if they could get out of it, they would. And so it's deep and dark, and we're going to learn here tonight. I think Paul goes real deep. But something I found out, he found out that he can't fix it himself. It's not something he can do. So, having said all of that, Paul tells us in verse 8, for we do not want you to be ignorant. It's interesting. That's a good study in itself. Write down every time Paul says we do not want you to be ignorant. And usually it's the things we're the most ignorant about, right? He says, hey, I don't want you to be ignorant about the second coming of the Lord. We're ignorant about that for the most part. And then he says, I don't want you to be ignorant about spiritual gifts. And we want to fight and be ignorant about that. And now here he's saying, hey, I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren. And here's what he says, of our trouble. So here's what Paul's saying. I've gone through something and I don't want you to be ignorant. Not so much as the other things, but here's what he's saying. I don't want you to be ignorant because I want you to find the healing that I found. So I don't want you to be ignorant, brethren, of our trouble which came to us in Asia. So remember, right now he's in Ephesus, which is part of Asia, and he's writing to them, and he's saying, hey, I don't want you to not understand what happened to us in Asia. Now, here's the problem. When? Is he talking about last week? Is he talking about last month? Is he talking about last year? Because all he says of, I don't want you to be ignorant of the trouble which came to us in Asia. And you guys know that I like to study, I like to read a lot. And I'll read a lot of commentaries, and to me it's kind of fun to see all of their speculation and what they do. And some of it's fun, some of it's like, would you stop? Because some go on and on and on. But what is he talking about? So here's the thing, here's the theories, right? Some of them. Some are saying in Acts 19, if you remember in Acts 19, they had riots in Ephesus. And when Paul was there, is that what he's talking about? Is he talking about those? Well, I'm not so sure because he wasn't really affected by those riots. I mean, they were intense and they were around him, but he wasn't so affected. And then some people say in 1 Corinthians 15, when he says we fought off wild beasts in Ephesus, we still don't know what he meant by that. I don't think he was thrown into the, Colosseum and had to fight lions and stuff. I don't know if he was calling the people who were coming against him wild beasts. Different things were going on. So I'm not sure about what he was saying there. And then others say, well, what about in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, where he talks about, and he lists all of the things he's gone through, and he says beatings too numerous to count. Every time I read, 2 Corinthians chapter 11, every time I read that, I go, ay, ay, ay. Whenever I read that, I think, and I'm whining. Right? When you read what Paul went through, and when people tell me, I'm sorry, and I go, you know what, tell Paul that when you get to heaven, because he's going to be real impressed on what you've done. So I read that, is it that stuff? Well, man, he's gone through a lot of stuff. Or is it maybe 2 Corinthians chapter 12 where he talks about the thorn in the flesh? Which one of those? Well, there's a lot of physical things there. Or is he talking about some mental pressure that came against him? I side more with the mental. I don't think it was so much of a physical act. Could have been, maybe. But I think, listen, I think there were pressures coming against Paul that he could not even imagine were coming. And I think, listen, he said even at the end of all of that, remember all that stuff he went through, shipwrecks and beatings and even being stoned to death, all of that, remember what he says? But most of all, it's the pressure from the churches. It's that mental pressure. So maybe that's what he's talking about, but he's going through it. John Calvin says this. He says, listen, he says at the end of verse 8, here's what he says would be a good way to interpret at the end of verse 8. Well, I haven't even gotten there, have I? So, brethren, the trouble in Asia, and then he says this, that we were burdened beyond measure in the middle of verse 8, above strength, so that we despaired even of life. Does that sound difficult? Does that sound like more of a mental thing than a physical thing? That now all of a sudden he's like not even afraid he's afraid he's not going to make it out of this, that this is something so desperate. John Calvin says, so that we were in anxiety even of life itself. Most people who suffer from depression also suffer from anxiety. And anxiety stinks. It's difficult. And it's a hard thing for people to deal with, and I get that. And here's what he says, man, I was anxious about this. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if I was going to be alive tomorrow. Maybe it was stuff coming at him, or was it just all the mental stress and strain that sometimes we face and we have to deal with? So he's trying to deal with that, and then Calvin says this, and this is interesting. He says it sounds like David. I think one of the most depressed people in the Bible is King David. You read the Psalms? Like, to me, some people say the Psalms are so encouraging. I don't think so. And the Psalms basically say, hey, life is hard, and it's going to get harder. Psalm 2, life is hard, and it's going to get harder. Psalm 3. So you get my point. So then, and David like never went, woohoo, hardly ever. It was always like, ay, ay, ay. Listen to Psalm 88. You have put away my acquaintances far from me. So you get what David's saying? Nobody's around, nobody's near, and you have made me an abomination to them. I am shut up, and I cannot get out. That's Psalm 88. Now you can read the rest of it. That doesn't sound very encouraging. So I think I think Paul is in that same place there and right now mentally he's in Ephesus writing this. I think he's struggling. And he's being honest and he's being transparent. And one thing I found in church, we come to church and people say, how are you? And here's what we do. I'm fine. And we're dying inside. We're hurting. Shouldn't this be the safe place? Shouldn't this be the place where we can tell brothers and sisters, here's how I feel, here's what's going on, I'm hurting, and we should be able to be open about that. But, hey man, most of the church is so judgmental. What do you mean you're hurting? Buck up. Get it together. You know, if you had enough faith, it's all on me again, right? If I just had enough faith, I could do it. If you could only do this. And once again, that's sad. Why would we do that to one another? Why would we, I always look at it this way. Why would we, as somebody is sinking and they're up to here in the water, just hand them a big, 8 by 8, 16 cement block and say, here, good luck. Shouldn't we care for him? Amen. So Paul's crying out here. I hear Paul, and I think he's crying out here. Hey, I despaired even of life. And that word despaired is like he's got no hope whatsoever. He's pressed down so hard. It's interesting if you remember back when we started 1 Corinthians, we talked about Corinth being that isthmus between, and they would walk between to get from one sea to the other, and it was a little short distance, so a lot of them would carry cargo. They would even pull ships across there at different times. And listen, it's like you get a picture of a guy who's got this huge burden on his back, and he's trying to walk across there, and he gets lower and lower and lower, and it's going to crush him. That's what Paul feels like. And some of us can relate. Some of us have been there where we feel so crushed by what's going on in our lives that we just feel completely overwhelmed. And so that's what Paul's saying. So he says, hey, I was despaired even of life. And then verse 9, yes, we had the sentence of death in ourselves. Now, again, a lot of people are saying, well, it's because people are coming against him. Maybe it was a physical thing, but I think it's deeper than that. I think a lot of people, listen, in the middle of some desperation thing where someone's coming against us, I think God's going to give us the faith to face that. But I think this is deeper than that. I think this is an ongoing thing that's just crushing him. And he says, listen, I had this sentence of death in ourselves. And he said that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God. Oh. You see, sometimes I think God takes his thumb and goes, here. And he goes, now you're going to trust me? Because he's got to break us. He's got to strip us. He's got to take all of that stuff away. You know, it's interesting as I think about people who get depressed that way and reading different things. Spurgeon's one of my heroes, right? He's an old dead guy. He was in the 1800s, the prince of preachers. He maybe ate peaches, I don't know. But listen, and that guy was a tremendous Bible teacher. Listen to what Spurgeon said. He says, I am the subject of depression of spirit so fearful that I hope none of you ever get such extremes of wretchedness as I go through. Wow, that sounds pretty deep, doesn't it? It sounds difficult. Oh, and then Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther, the reformer, right? Martin Luther. Now, if you know much about him, the guy was a piece of work in so many ways. Like he would rescue people. He would rescue people out of convents, and some priests, they would come out of Catholicism, and he would help them. So he played matchmaker. And people would come to his place, and he'd say, okay, this ex-priest can marry this nun. He'd put them together and make little families and do stuff, and he's really good at it. Well, there was this one lady, Katie, that nobody took. So here's what he does, the romantic guy that he was. No one else will have you, so I'll take you. What a good guy, right? So he marries Katie. Now, she was real devoted to him. You know, one of the best books I read, and it's not just a biography. It's what do you call the one that's a fictional biography? But anyway, it's about her life. And so, listen, after she marries him, she's loving him, she's taking care of him, but he wouldn't support them. Like he would give away all of his writings. And she would say, can't you like just sell one book so we can make some money? And he would say, no, he sold all of their wedding gifts to survive. Kind of that guy. Well, one day he got super depressed. And I guess he was very prone to depression. And he got super depressed. Well, Katie sat in her rocking chair in front of the fire and took a Bible. By the way, this is before the printing press. So he had handwritten a Bible from, original languages into German. And she had this Bible, and she's sitting there tearing the pages out, throwing them in the fire. And he goes, what on earth are you doing? Now, this is a depressed guy, right? What's the matter with you? And she goes, well, this isn't true. I don't believe anything in here. And he goes, why not? And she goes, because of the way you're acting. God can't be real. This can't be true. Oh, he changed instantly. So here's a guy prone to depression, Martin Luther, and we could go on with others. I think Moses. Read some stuff about Moses. Moses would get so bummed out and stuff, he'd slam the door of his tent and go in and not let anybody in and hang out in there. So a lot of stuff going on, and we need to know. Listen, we need to know. Here's what Paul says. We get to that place where we're desperate, and we despair even of life itself. And then he says this. He says, why is God taking us to that point? It's for this reason, that we should not trust ourselves, but that we would trust in God. Now, I don't want to read the rest for a minute, but we got to learn to trust him, right? This weekend we started Daniel, and we talked about Daniel trusting God. When did Daniel trust God? He only trusted God when he started going through bad stuff, right? Hey, he was a teenager, got ripped out of his home, got taken into captivity, got put in, a situation where he either trusted God or, he would be executed. But he's got to do that. And so here's what Paul says. I got to the point where I could not trust myself anymore. I had to trust God. Have you been there? Have you been to the place where you finally came? I'm not talking about just getting saved. I get that. But if you come to the place in your walk with Jesus where I'm going to trust you because you know what, Jesus? I can't do this. I can't handle this. This is way beyond me. It's beyond anything I could do. And thank God at that moment we have Jesus. So here's what he's saying, that we trust God. And then here's what I love. We trust, but he says, not trust in ourselves, but in God who what? Who raises the dead. Oh, you know what? C.S. Lewis, I was going to read let me read his quote because it is a little bit weird, but I kind of like it. Here's what he says. Nothing that has not died will be resurrected. Now, to me, that sounds a little backwards, right? Here's what he's saying. If you want to get resurrected, you got to die. Oh, no. I like the resurrection part, not so much the death part, right? I don't want to die to myself. I want all of myself to go with me. And that's what happens with a lot of us, especially early on in our walk with the Lord. We bring everything with us. And he says, we got to get rid of all that stuff. So we're going to start here. We're going to take baby steps. We're going to do a couple things. And then the stuff you're really holding on to, I'm going to break you so bad. Because I want you to quit trusting in yourself. And I want you to trust me in the one who raises the dead, because only dead things get resurrected. And I believe Paul had to come. I believe he had to learn that. And I believe we all need to learn that. Have you been resurrected? Have you come to the place where now you can live for Jesus and you can get there? Again, I'm going to quote Calvin a few times. I know some of you freak out at that name, but it's okay. Just chill, right? So listen, he's not the evil one of the universe, right? So here's what Calvin, he gave us a couple things that we need to observe here that I think are important. First place, that fleshly confidence with which we are puffed up is so obstinate that it cannot be overthrown in any other way than our falling into utter despair. Oh, that's pretty insightful. Oh, and then the second thing, he says, the second thing we may infer is how displeasing to God confidence in ourselves must be when for the purpose of correcting it, it is necessary that we should be condemned to death so that we can be resurrected. You see, things happen in our lives and they're not just failures. They're God working and God moving. And, I think that's an important thing. Now, I'm a person, I'm not afraid of failure. I did a lot in high school. So it never bothered. I remember I was dating a girl before I met Gaynell. I was dating this girl, and she got an F, and she, was freaking out. I mean, major meltdown, big drama. And I'm going, what is the matter with you? I got an F. I go, it's okay, you'll get used to it. It's not that hard. After the first one or two, it's kind of easy. It's not that. And I'm thinking, what is the big deal here? All you have to do is take your pencil and go like this, and you have a B. And it's okay, right? There's things you can do to fix this. It's not the end of the world. But some of us, we can't take failure because we're so afraid. Hey, to me, failures are stepping stones. And they're not stepping stones necessarily up. They're stepping stones to God. Because the times I fail are the times I learn to trust him. And something I've learned over my 30 years of ministry, if I get it done, it's not right. If God gets it done, it's a good thing. And so I need to learn that, and I need to walk in that and do that. So here's what Paul says. He says, God who raised him from the dead. Now check this out, because this is, I think verse 10 is awesome. He says, God who raises the dead, verse 10, who delivered us from so great a death. So here's what he's saying. God delivered me. And that word for deliver is interesting. I looked it up, and it's like dragged into something. So here's what Paul's saying. God got a hold of me and went and dragged me into this safety place, right? So he says, and listen, God delivered us. So here's what Paul knows. God has delivered me. Oh, he's not done. He says, who delivered us from so great a death? And check this out. Who does deliver us? He didn't just deliver me yesterday. He's delivering me today. Oh, and then it gets a little better, right? Isn't this good? He says, not only that, he says, he delivered us, and in whom we trust that he will still deliver us. Woo, yeah. You know, in your life, if you haven't failed and been delivered, you don't know what deliverance is all about. You see, we've got to experience some hurts and some pain. That's part of growing. And when we learn that, when we learn that he delivered us, we can have confidence that he will deliver us in what we're in now. And then we have greater confidence that he's going to deliver us in the future. But if you've never walked through anything with God, if you've always avoided the hurt, the pain, the difficulties, you know, because we're a painless society, right? I mean, you know, we want to avoid pain at all costs, physical and mental. And some pain is good. Some pain keeps us from doing dumb things. And so here's my point. If you haven't been in pain and delivered, then you don't have confidence today when you're in pain that he will deliver you. I know God is going to work in my life. Why? Because he worked in my life last week. Because he worked in my life last year. Because he worked in my life 10 years ago. So I have confidence. Why? Because he did it. He's proven himself. And I know he's going to do it today. And guess what? I know he's going to do it in the future. I know the things that I'm going to face, he's going to be there. And I have to be afraid of that. And I have to have fear. And I just love that. Listen, I love thinking about that because that's my God. I don't know who your God is. It always cracks me up when people go, oh, my God doesn't do that. Well, you need a new God. Because my God does that. And here's what the thing is, the God of the Bible does that. And so Paul is like, I'm going, woo! So you get the kind of idea. Verse 8, we kind of hit the bottom, right? And we get to verse 10, woo, woo, right? Why? What changed? Not our situation, God changed. We got our eyes on Jesus, right? We have our eyes on God. And listen, so he's going to do that. And then verse 11, he says, I love this, because he doesn't leave the people out. Listen to what he says. You also helping together in prayer. Here's what Paul says. You guys are involved. The guys and the people in Corinth. Remember, this is a church that stinks. And here's what he says. It's you guys are helping together in prayer. Paul believed in prayer. Paul was a man of prayer, but he also believed in the prayers of others. And I don't think there's anything better than when people say, I'm praying for you. That just like makes you feel so good, makes you feel like somebody really cares. Just last Saturday, somebody went out and said, you know, you need to know I pray for you every week, and you know, and that makes you feel good, right? Thank you. You're praying for me. So Paul says, listen, we despaired of life, but we trusted in God who raises the dead, who did deliver us, who will deliver us, or who still does and will. And he says, you also helping together in prayer for us, that thanks may be given by many persons on our behalf for the gift granted to us through many. Oh, do you hear what he just said? He says, man, listen, you guys are involved and you're praying for us. And as we do this thing together, a whole bunch of us can give thanks. I think it's awesome. Listen, I think it's awesome when we can tell people that are praying for us, hey, your prayers were answered. And I think all prayers are answered. Sometimes it's no. And I don't like to tell them, you know, God said no when you were praying for me, but keep praying. But when we can just share with people, here's what God accomplished. You prayed for me. And you know what happens? Now what does Paul say? Many gave thanks. But when we cloister in and we don't let anybody in, and we don't let anybody near us, because by the way, we're Americans. We don't need people, so we isolate ourselves. What happens when we get delivered? Oh, you celebrate. But when you get delivered, when there's a whole bunch of people involved, there's a lot of praising going on. Are you getting what's happening? And I think, and I don't know about you guys, but I got to admit, I get a little bit confused by God binding himself so much into prayer. I think prayer changes things. And, I think it's important we pray. I think God's sovereign, does what he wants. I don't understand all of that. I don't figure that out. I know some people are great theologians and they got it all figured out, but I'm from Bisbee. So, I just accept that prayer changes things. And here's what I know. Jesus told me to pray, that I'm going to pray, and I'm going to be a praying person. I don't have to have all the answers about it, and I need to celebrate. Hey, when God does something, I need to celebrate, and I need to be glad with many, and then we need to count it a gift what he does. R. Kent Hughes said this, in prayer, human impotence, right? Because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about giving ourselves up and quit. Human impotence casts itself at the feet of divine omnipotence. Oh, doesn't that sound good? Hey, your inability to do something in prayer, you come to God in prayer, and your inability to do something, you're casting that at the feet of someone who can do everything, and you trust him. So that's what we're doing. So, and I know this is kind of not very many verses, but I think they're powerful verses. And I think they're verses we need to focus on, and we need to think about what's happening. And I think we need to have a greater understanding again. I believe as people, we should have an answer when somebody says, why do good things happen to bad people? I'm sorry, I said that backwards. Why do bad things, well, some people ask that one too, but why do bad things, my brain, why do bad things happen to good people? And I think we should have somewhat of an answer. Our first answer should be because, you know what? Because of sin. There is sin in this world, and it's not disappeared, and it may not even be our sin, it may be their sin, but that's number one. But then we also need to, what we've learned here is that, hey, why do we go through things? So we can comfort others, so we can tell them, I know, so we can be empathetic and work through that. And I'm not saying that you can't be empathized with people who you haven't gone through, but here's what I know, man, there's nothing like somebody talking to us and letting us know, I went through that, and here's what happened. I called somebody today to talk to them because they just got a diagnosis probably of prostate cancer. And they called and I talked to them, I called them back, and they go, so what happened? So they want to know, they're afraid, they're scared. And I says, well, here's what I experienced, and then you share your experience. So, here's the thing. I look at something like that and I go, so that's why I went through that 2 years ago. So I could talk to that person today that's afraid, that's scared of what they're facing and going through. And I think that, so sometimes those things happen. I remember years ago when I had my first kidney stone like years ago. It was horrible. It's like the worst ever, man. It's worse than giving birth. You know what? Giving birth, you get something at the end. Passing a kidney stone, you get nothing. Relief, but nothing. I mean, it's like horrible. And I'm thinking, why am I going through this? I remember I was curled up on the floor in our bathroom, and Gaynell goes, what's up? And I said, I need to go to the emergency room. Here's what she did. Let me take a shower first. Okay, I'm just laying here dying, but go ahead, get clean, and then I go through it, and here's the thing. Why did that happen to me? A doctor comes in my room. It's Sunday morning, because that happened on a Saturday, and they had to do some other stuff because they had other issues. But listen, he comes in my room, and I'm reading a devotional, and I'm doing the Bible reading. And this doctor comes and he says, what are you reading? I go, I'm reading this devotional, and I'm doing our Bible reading. What is that? Let me see that. And I gave it, he goes, can I have this? And I go, yeah, take it. You can have that. Here's this Bible reading schedule. Here's my Bible. Take everything. But no, listen, and this guy had backslidden. And because of that, he came back to the Lord. And he started doing mission work and helping out and doing stuff. Why did I go through that? So he could do that. And so we need to know God puts us in those positions, not because he hates us, but here's what every time something happens to me, I always say, what are we going to do with this, Lord? When I broke my leg really bad and I'm laying in bushes, I'm going, what are we going to do with this, Lord? I would really like to get out of here, but, at least get me back to someplace, and I don't want to die in the weeds. But God does those things so we can minister to other people. And so that's one of the reasons, I got off track there. So then, he also teaches us his comfort and his mercy. Here's the thing, you'll never experience God's comfort and mercy if you don't go through anything. Are you with me? None of us look for it and want to do it. And then it teaches us to trust God and not in the flesh or pride. And then lastly, it gives us hope for the future. Because if God did that today, he can do that tomorrow. And we need to trust him. So Paul here, every time I read this section of 2 Corinthians, I go, thank you, Lord. Thank you for having Paul record that. Because here's what I know now. I'm not that horrible of a whiner, because Paul's kind of whining right here. And here's what I know, it's okay. But then I need to realize sometimes God simply wants to break me. And being broken is a good thing, not a bad thing. Because I know he can put me back together. Whenever I do the pottery presentation, I always break a pot. Why? Because that pot needs to get fixed. And the only way to fix it is break it. You can't just go fix. You got to break it and start all over. And sometimes we need to be broken. So let's trust him. Let's be like Paul, and let's trust him in difficult, hard situations. Let's stand up and pray. Father, I thank you. I thank you for here in Corinthians as we look at this. And Lord, it's a passage that, Lord, as we read it, we can superficially read it and just kind of blow past it. But Lord, all of the stuff going on. And my heart still breaks for people who are hurting, and Lord, people who get in a place of that darkness. And I just pray that we can be a people of understanding and caring and loving. And that you would use us in individuals' lives and each other's lives. And then, Lord, I do pray that we would understand what we're going through today might be simply because we need to be broken, or it might be because you want to use us in somebody's life in some way that we would be unusable without what we're doing and what we're going through now. So God, we want to accept the things you bring our way. I think sometimes we're yelling at the devil when it's you working in us. And I just pray, God, that you would have your way and you would be glorified in our lives. Whether it's in the real high highs or whether it's in the brokenness, that God, we would allow you to get the glory. And I'm going to ask that you stay in an attitude of prayer for a couple more minutes. And as we get ready to close, there's some here tonight who maybe heard some of this and you're still not sure of where you stand with the Lord. Yeah, you're listening to this, but you're not sure. Well, you know what? Tonight is the day of salvation, if you will. Right now is the time. You need to put your trust in him. So if I'm speaking to you and you do not have a relationship with Jesus, or maybe, and I bring this up a lot, I know, but maybe you're a poser. I bring it up because I was a poser. So maybe you're a poser and maybe it's not real for you. Then tonight, let's make it real. Let's change that. I know I came to a point in my life where I had to change that. So here's the deal. Jesus Christ went to the cross and took your place for your sins. So it all starts with you've got to admit you're a sinner. That's what you have to admit tonight. You got to come to the place where you're going to admit to God you're a sinner, and then you need to understand your sin has offended him. And I know for some people they're saying you shouldn't say things like that, but it's the truth. If we've sinned, we've offended a holy and righteous God because he's perfect. And because we've offended him, here's what we deserve, his wrath. He explains that and he puts that out there. So, since we've sinned, we deserve his wrath. That's bad news. That means his wrath forever. The great news, the good news is that Jesus Christ went to the cross and took the wrath that you deserve, the wrath that I deserve. He took it upon himself in a moment, in an instant of time. And now here's what he tells you. Trust me. We even sing it in a couple songs tonight. Trust him. And if you put your trust in him, then your wrath that you deserve will be gone. And you trust him, and he will give you new life. In other words, you will be born again, and you'll be a new creation. So if you want that tonight, I'm gonna say a prayer here, and you can repeat this prayer after me. You can say it out loud. You can say it silently. It's not volume. What matters is your heart. So as I get ready and I say this prayer, you repeat it and you mean it. You've got to be sincere. You can't just say words. You've got to be sincere. And here's the thing. Maybe you're backslidden. Well, you know what? Come home tonight. Come back to Jesus. Now's the time. Or you may be watching online. You can say the prayer right where you're at and just call on the name of the Lord then. But here's the deal, man. You've got to be real. You've got to mean it. It's got to come from your heart. So say this prayer with me. Jesus, tonight I confess to you that I am a sinner. I'm sorry that I sinned against you, Lord. And right now I'm asking you to forgive me. Jesus, thank you for dying for me. Thank you tonight for your forgiveness. And right now, I'm asking you to come into my heart and change me. Jesus, come into my life and guide me. I want you to be my Lord and my Savior.